Welcome back to Heightscast, the podcast of the Heights School. This is Rich Moss with you from the campus of the Heights in Potomac, Maryland. We're here to talk about the education and the formation of young men fully alive in the liberal arts tradition. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for continuing to share us with your friends. We're very, very grateful. Today, I'm delighted to welcome back to the podcast our headmaster, Alvaro de Vicente.
Thank you, Rich.
It's great to have you here again, Alvaro.
Great to be here.
And so we are going to talk about something that we've talked about before. It feels to me sometimes like we talk about it a lot, but then you go back in the archives and you realize, goodness, at least on the podcast, it's been a few years.
Yeah, so. No. I when you told me when we talk about this, my first reaction was, again?
Yeah,
didn't we just talk about it? But
totally.
I think you're right. Maybe I'm just thinking about it way more than I'm talking about it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because we do see the impact, and so it's good to
Right.
continue to talk about it. I think also this is a different sort of an episode. Like many episodes, it's not that we plan them extensively and ad nauseum, but we do perhaps think about a structure for the conversation a bit.
Right.
This one, there's just been a lot of things happening outside of the school, some things inside the school related to parent events and things of that nature. And so I thought it was a good chance to just kind of pull some of the ideas that you've talked about before out from previous episodes and just kick them around a little bit. So
Okay.
it's a bit of a less structured conversation, but one that I think will be helpful. And so two of the things that are leading this conversation first would be the Father series, which have been really beautifully successful. And this is a series for Heights fathers where men from each of the different school divisions, the dads, come to campus on different nights and talk about how to share God's plan for marriage with their sons. So these have been great, wildly successful, and just a real resource to myself and to others, I think. But in one of these, there was a really good conversation led by middle school head Andy Reid about phones. And I think it struck some of us in thinking about that conversation that when we use words and language, the words that we use are important. And I think oftentimes we might tell ourselves, hey, everything kind of becomes about the smartphone, about social media, about pornography. And it seems like, hey, maybe we should think about this a little bit more to make sure we're thinking about things along the right line. What is a smartphone? Is pornography actually like the only danger? Is social media the only sort of boogeyman to be aware of? Are there other things that we should be thinking about? The other that I saw coming from outside the school was a recent article lots of articles dealing with a study in the UK. And so this particular article, which we'll give out attribution in the show notes, but the title is "School Phone Bans Alone Do Not Improve Grades or Well-Being," says UK study. Researchers say bans need to be part of a wider strategy to tackle negative impact of mobile use on children. So the negative impacts are undisputed, but basically what the researchers have concluded is it simply kind of carving out this time in school where they can't use phones doesn't make those negative impacts go away. So a lot of this stuff in the air, a lot going on Capitol Hill in the States following Jonathan Haidt's book, Anxious Generation, a lot going on. So let's begin the conversation. And I think kind of maybe just going back to basic principles. I mean, you gave us a framework back in the day for how to think about when is the right time to get your child a phone.
Right.
Notice I didn't say smartphone.
Right.
So that's kind of a change. But when parents are thinking about whether or not to get their kids a phone, what should they be considering? Can you remind us?
Yeah, so great. So a couple of things about that. One is, when should a child get a phone? I say there's no line when somebody's ready. I think there are some lines when somebody's clearly not ready, right? I mean, so, 5-year-old, no way, right? 8th grader, no way. Other than that, let's have a conversation, right? So, but the question of when is the child ready for a phone is going to come down to a couple basic principles that I think we've been talking about for years, and now we can nuance them a little bit more, perhaps, even in this episode. One is think about the phone as a tool. Right? The phone is a tool. And before you give your child a tool, you have to ask, what does he need the tool for? Does he need the tool? What for? And once you know what for, what is the most appropriate tool to give him? Right? We do this with everything, right? So let's say, well, he needs to do a project for his school that includes cutting some wood and nailing some pieces of wood together. Okay, he's going to need some tools, clearly. I'm going to get him a high-powered chainsaw. Yeah, that is a tool, but he doesn't need a high-powered chainsaw to cut a couple pieces of wood. Mm-hmm. The second part of the principle is not only what tool does he need, but is he capable of mastering the tool? Right? So your freshman in high school is not going to be able likely to master a high-powered chainsaw to cut a little piece of wood. Right? You're introducing, and the reason that you don't want to do that is not only because it's an unnecessary tool, it's because it's a dangerous tool in his hands. So the question then is, when is my child ready to get a phone? Well, what does he need the phone for? What is the most appropriate tool to meet those needs, assuming that he's ready to master that tool, right? That the tool is not going to master him. If it isn't, then I think we have to weigh the need versus the damage that that tool will do to the boy and decide, how do we navigate that? Right? Maybe we can put some restrictions, to the tool, or maybe we just have to say, sorry, you just can't have it.
Yeah.
Way too dangerous for you, right? But that's a parental decision, I think, and that's where the line would come in. But I think those are the basic principles to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I think those are super sound. So then we kind of think about the need, think about the tool that might meet that need, talk about the mastery. Do they have mastery? And then, of course, we can talk in a little bit about the potential damages and how to mitigate those damages, if any, the potential risks.
Right.
So, so here's where things get kind of interesting. Is that over the last few years, I think it's a great development, but you do have these quote unquote feature phones that are coming out. So, Gab, Pinwheel, the Bark phone, other ones like the Light phone. Nokia has reissued the old phone that I used. I think it was my first cell phone that had Snake on it back in the day. So, which is like an incredibly addicting game, by the way.
Yeah, I mean they're designed that way, right? All those games are designed to get you hooked.
Gosh, I love Snake. Anyway, right. But so you do have these feature phones that are coming out, and I think what we have maybe unintentionally done is that we've basically said, okay, any phone that, and maybe this is just me. So again, this conversation is trying to tease this out. But we kind of tell ourselves, okay, if a phone has internet access, unrestricted internet access, if it has social media, the capacity for social media, either through apps or just through accessing those programs through a browser, then it's a smartphone. And if a phone does not have a browser, or if it doesn't have TikTok, Instagram, whatever else, then it's a dumb phone. I think I've heard people talk about things along those lines, and I think we need to pause first.
Yes,
because I think oftentimes what that could lead to is a world where we say, okay, our son's in 8th grade, and I'm not going to get him a smartphone. So sorry,
son,
a dumb phone. You're getting a Pinwheel or whatever else.
Right.
And again, we don't want to make these judgments for parents, but I do think it's important. Maybe what we can do for parents is clarify the area so they can make the best decision possible. But when you hear that dichotomy of smartphone has browser, social media, and dumb phone doesn't have browser, perhaps doesn't have social media. Of course, all this stuff can be hacked, but whatever. Right. How do you? And then you hear someone say, "Well, we're not getting our child a smartphone in 8th grade. We're just going to get them a dumb phone." How do you approach that? How does that sound to you?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that's a great conversation now. That's where we are, right? Yeah. Because we identified, and I think we ourselves did this, frankly. We identified smartphones as the enemy of the young, and dumb phones as the cavalry coming to save the day because, my kid needs some kind of communication and with friends and with us, and we're going to give him a dumb phone. And then they get more sophisticated, right? And I think you're right that what we got into is to say, all right, if you have a browser is bad, if you don't have a browser is okay. And aside from the fact that, the hackability of any of these phones and the fact that most kids now are experts accompanied by incredible consulting companies to help them hack just about anything, right? But I think I like to look at it in a slightly different way, which is, okay, our mind easily goes into the categories and the silos, right? Smartphones, dumb phones that look like smartphones, dumb phones that look dumb. And, this is the line between the smartphone and dumb phone, right? Just because it makes it easier and it makes those decisions easier. But two things, or the most important thing here is, okay, what actually is the problem that I'm trying to avert? Well, what is it? Because I think we've gone from thinking about the problem to thinking about some of the ways in which the problem can be manifested, right? So we've decided, well, as long as there's no social media, no Instagram and TikTok, and as long as there's no access to pornography, then we're good to go. And say, well, that identifies a particular problem, which may be pornography and what that will do to a boy, and social media, perhaps both a distraction and the poor communication and the degrading of the person, whatever it might be. But see, we're no longer talking about actually what is it that I'm trying to avoid. Because if what I'm trying to avoid is, okay, I'm trying to avoid my son, sure, having access to pornography as much as I can, but I'm trying to avoid him from being in situations where he's more likely to engage in communication with peers that is at best useless, more likely a waste of time, and more likely ends up demeaning other people, right? Okay, so then, sure, social media presents that danger. Frankly, so does group texting, right? Maybe I don't have Instagram and TikTok, but I'm in a group text, and I text 100 times per evening, and the conversations go from like, don't say anything, and just like, oh, dude, right?
Grunts,
multiple times, and technical grunts, to making fun of people and talking about people behind their backs and so forth, right? What happened to the old dictum? Don't talk poorly about people behind their backs, like even their electronic backs, right? So if I think that that's a problem, then I have to look at the tool, and really it doesn't matter if it's a smartphone or pinwheel or dumb phone. Like, if that's a problem, I have to address that and see how to limit that problem. Well, what if the problem is distractibility? Not only to videos, but just this desire to be entertained, even if it is by looking at text over and over again. Okay, that's another problem. Sure, is the distractibility is going to be much greater if I have a browser, because then I have the whole world available to me, right? I have an entertainment center at my fingertips. But we can get distracted with less distractions, right? Once we create the habit of being distracted, right? So even a phone without a browser could be a huge distraction. What about if the problem is, well, I'm just too kind of attached to my own world? And it's not that I get distracted, but I get secluded from my family and friends because I'm in my phone. Okay, that's a slightly different problem, right? So I think, the point is that because of the emphasis on postponing when our children are going to use smartphones, I think we may have fallen into an oversimplification of the question of what to do with phones.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the kind of fundamental ideas, it's a tool. Can you master it? What's the purpose? What's the downside of this tool? And clearly identifying for my child, identifying what are the dangers for him. Right? It's not just images, but what are the dangers?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the kind of kid who gets really addicted to conversation and just can't let it go? Is it the kind of kid who's shy and finds solace in looking at his phone, even if there's not that much to look at?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What is the danger, and what should I prudentially do as a parent to help him avoid that danger as much as possible?
Yeah, no, that's a really good way to think about it. Because it's interesting when you watch the advertisements that are created by, and again, I don't want to, be overly critical of these new feature phone companies, because I think what they're trying to do is give parents more power, which is an awesome thing.
Right.
Like, thank you, people, for giving parents more power.
Right.
By the same token, when you watch, for example, the videos that some of the companies might put out, it seems like what they're trying to do is help kids feel connected, even though they can't connect to everything. So, for example, there's a phone that allows you to, hey, you can download, Spotify, and you can still message, you can still share pictures, and you can still comment and like and all the rest of it, and you can still get all these apps, but you can't access pornography, and you can't download TikTok. It seems then that what we're doing is protecting our children from a certain type of content, which is good, but we're still wanting or providing them a tool that allows them to be perpetually connected.
Right.
And I think that's interesting to ponder.
Yeah, it is, because I mean, and this is a whole, I think, other topic of conversation, right? Which is, is really important for young people to learn sociability and friendship, right? I mean, when you're young, you're surrounded by peers. I think of it, schools are, in some ways, schools are cauldrons of friendship. There's a bunch of peers together, spending the whole day together, common interests, academic and athletic and artistic and so forth. And it's really important for young people to develop the virtue of friendship, to know and to care about somebody else, and to be willing to sacrifice yourself for that person, and to be stretched, right? To be checked by other kids in the school, right? So that you learn social behavior. That's really important. So what's happened is that the narrative is, unless you are in social media or able to text continually, you are no longer capable of friendship. That's a narrative. So even though, there's a lot of talk about smartphones and this and that, I think that's the narrative that as a parent you have to confront and you have to deal with.
Right.
Right? Because if you don't deal with that, you're talking around the issue, and you may be providing different tools that prevent other problems, but don't address that one.
Right.
And I think a very significant question for every parent is, do I really believe that my child will have no friends unless he can be continually communicating via his phone with his peers?
Mm-hmm.
Do I really believe that? If that's the case, right, if I really believe that, then am I willing to sacrifice my son's friendships because I don't want him to have this tool? I will argue, and I argue this from what I have seen among teenage boys, that the lack of that electronic communication with friends does not prevent a boy from developing true friendships. It may exclude him from the peer conversation that goes on in school. It will likely be the case that he'll come in the morning and not be up to speed with what his friends are talking about, or the kids are talking about, because there's been a conversation for the last 3 hours, not the last 3 hours, the 3 hours the previous night, about whatever events, that now they're continuing in person, that you're 3 hours behind. But I think that is different from the ability to develop true friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, does the giving in to those electronic communications every evening actually lead to helping my son be a better friend? Or do they erode his ability to be a better friend?
Mm.
Because what we may be doing as parents is saying, I want my kid to be social, and therefore I have to put him in that electronic room with everyone else, because that's the narrative. But it may be that what I'm actually doing is I'm making my kid antisocial by putting him in that room.
Mm.
I'm giving into the narrative, thinking I'm doing a good thing and the right thing. I'm actually limiting his ability to become a really good friend. I think that's really, that is the conversation that has to be had by parents among parents before talking about the phone.
Yeah.
Because without that conversation, I think determining what phone to give to my son at a particular time is talking about a tool without really understanding what the tool may do or may not do, or what the purpose is.
Yep. No, absolutely. I think that's right. And I mean, you can spend just as much time on a Gab phone or on a Pinwheel or on Bark phone, like whatever. You can spend just as much time on those devices as you could on a phone with a browser.
Right.
You just could. They're addictive. I mean, how many of us at a red light, there's no particular reason to grab your phone. It hasn't dinged or anything, but you reach out to look at it because I don't know what. Maybe you kind of flick through your apps a little bit or pull down from the top to see what texts have come in.
Do you really? Shame on you.
However, I've never done this in my life. I want to go on record. No.
Oh my gosh.
But it's, I think it's just so many of us just, we want to fill the unfilled second with a reach for the device. And you can reach for a device that doesn't have a browser very easily. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves.
Right.
And so, I think that is, those are the questions to ask, because I think there is kind of this pressure. And obviously I think it's a great, the wait till 8 movement was a good thing in its time.
Right.
It was a good thing to not give a child a browser and a smartphone before 8th grade.
Right.
It doesn't mean that 8th grade is like the time to bestow these things. And I think we do well to think about, okay, what again, your rubric here, what is the need? Well, I got to be able to call you when I'm at practice. You can get phones that only call.
Right.
And then what are the risks? Flipping to the last thing. And I think we tell ourselves, well, I got to give him something because he's in 8th grade. Do you? And so as long as I give him something where he can't access porn, then we're in a good place.
Exactly.
And I think it's time to slow down. It's really good that you're drawing these things, bringing these things to our attention. The capacity for relationship. Another corollary would be perhaps the capacity for silence and the impact that has on prayer.
Well, that's a huge, and I don't know if we ever had a podcast about that. Maybe seems like we did, but maybe we're just talking in the lunchroom. Like,
stay tuned, folks. Yeah, exactly.
I don't remember.
That's exactly right.
But I mean, that is the other, the capacity for silence, actually, like the capacity for contemplation, right? And contemplation defined the way that Pieper defines it in Only the Lover Sings, it's a beautiful essay, where he says contemplation is observing lovingly, right? So the capacity to observe lovingly, observe a sunset, observe a tree, observe another person, observe the divine, right? Lovingly. Like that capacity requires a state of mind and of heart that is settled and at peace. And that state of mind and heart is continually troubled by our practical needs. And we have to deal with them, right? We're not monks in a monastery. We have to deal with them. We have professional work and interactions and gas up the car and, just look at the practical needs. However, we are making matters worse by filling every second, as you were saying, every second of the day in which our mind is not engaged in a practical need with a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, we're also eroding our capacity to contemplate, right, to observe lovingly. So that's a whole other conversation that we could have.
Yeah, absolutely, and we should, and perhaps we will at the forthcoming conference on transmitting the faith, passing the faith on to the next generation.
Right.
I think this is absolutely a part of it. So again, no particular concrete takeaways aside from the fact that we shouldn't approach this as if every 8th grade boy or 9th grade boy or whatever the case might be is sort of cut, copy, paste the same, and that every single one is automatically ready for something at that point in his life.
Right.
We're not exactly sure what it is that they're ready for. We don't exactly know when they're ready for it, but this is what these prudential conversations are between parents, moms and dads, teachers, all the rest of it.
Absolutely. And it's just changing stage, if you want. Like, I mean, I want to talk about things that haven't happened yet, but I'm very seriously considering, right now we have a policy at the school that 8th graders and below are not supposed to bring a phone. Mm-hmm. And 9th through 11th graders check their phone in the morning and then, pick it up in the afternoon. I'm seriously considering a policy where 9th graders wouldn't bring a phone either.
Yeah.
That 9th grade, this idea that 8th grade I'm too young to have a phone, but 9th grade I can. Like, well, maybe that's an artificial line, mm-hmm. right? Maybe the question again is, do you need it?
Right.
Right? Do you need it? Are you driving yourself? Right? Are you doing something that you need this tool? And if you don't need it, just for the mere fact that you're now in 9th grade doesn't mean that you should have it. So that's, as part of this, thinking about what is it really that what need are we looking to satisfy, and what is the best way to satisfy that need? Right.
And the need is oftentimes the perceived need is, well, I need to be able to talk to my son when he's ready to get picked up at practice, right. Or I need to talk to him when he's taking public transportation. Great. But again, in your rubric, that doesn't necessarily entail, creating whatever sort of content and sharing it in a group text, right? Which is still permitted. That doesn't necessarily entail all sorts of things that are permitted on some of these feature phones, which again, really cool development, but not sort of the be all end all of our issues. And I am so gratified to see, this conversation is definitely kind of, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? And so we have this amazing community here where parents talk about this stuff all the time. And it's so cool to see, high school parents talking, discussing how they want to raise their kids. And so we're learning a lot from our parents, which is, I think, how this thing's supposed to work. But, there are phones where all you got is voice, and maybe that's okay for some kids. Maybe there's other ways to go about it. There's families that just get a family phone, right? Where you have like a family light phone or something like that all the kids can share. So there's different, or that, when they're younger, there's families that say, okay, once you're into college, then you can, if you want to buy your own, smartphone, you're welcome to do that. So there's different approaches. And I love the subsidiarity of what you're presenting here, because it allows families to make their call. But I do think it's one where the calls are going to be made better if we're using clearer language. Right. And simply because a phone does not have a browser, that doesn't mean I don't think that's a dumb phone. I mean, think about 20 years, 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
If someone told you could have, both all of your vinyls in your pocket, and you could communicate with everybody at the same time, and you have a GPS and direction and all the rest of it. That's not a dumb device.
No, that would be a brilliant device. It would be called a brilliant phone.
That's right.
Yeah, no, and I think it helps to think about it and talk about it without using the categories.
Yes.
So that you can focus more on what are the individual things that I'm looking to address.
Right.
And what's the best way to do that?
Yeah.
Because I think the categories can mask uses that we just don't think about, but that we offer to our children.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great piece in the Atlantic a while ago on how iMessage really it's social media. I mean, it's
Right.
You can like, thumbs up, thumbs down, all the rest of it. You can check it compulsively. So it is. I think that's right. When you use categories, you can kind of muddy the waters.
Right.
So well, good. Again, just we proffer this conversation where we're kind of seeking truth together to the wonderful parents in our community who are doing the same, and more to follow, I am sure. But for now, thank you so much, Alvaro. It's been awesome.
Thank you, Rich.
Thanks for listening, everybody. To support the work of our headmaster and his faculty who are doing their all to form young men fully alive here on our campus and beyond the walls of this campus through this podcast and other outreach efforts, do consider supporting the Heights financially. To do that, visit heightsforum.org. Click on Give. Everything you do is incredibly, incredibly appreciated. While you're there, you can also check out information on the upcoming conference on passing the faith on to the next generation. Should be a really, really great day for parents and their friends beyond the walls in April of 2025. So a lot of good stuff coming up. Thanks for being a part of this community with us. We'll talk to you next week.